Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning as well to our audience from North America. Today we will have a webinar about the new railway cybersecurity standard TS-50701, and we will do a deep dive into the standard. Together with me, I will have Christian Schleuber, the convener of TC9X and Working Group 26 from Senelec, that will explain us how the standard looks like and how it's working, and what should you do in order to achieve best compliance to that. Here we go. So in the agenda for today, we will start from explaining about TS-50701. Christian will go over it. We'll go over the rail cybersecurity challenges. How does these challenges impact rail transport? How can TS-50701 help? And it will deconstruct TS-50701. And the second part, I will help with explaining on how Silas One is tackling the requirements of TS-50701 and how products Silas One specifically can help you in achieving the requirements of TS-50701. It will explain the product profile of Silas One, the deployment architecture, and how does it work with the TS. So Christian, the floor is yours. Please go ahead and explain us on what TS-50701 is.
Yeah, thank you, Mickey. And again, a warm welcome to everybody on this webinar, and also thanks to Silas for the possibility to present the TS-50701 that was just published a few months ago to a wider audience. So Mickey already explained, so I'll start with a bit of the challenges that we have in the railway domain, that you understand why it was really required to write and document a standard there, what these challenges really mean for us in the railway domain, and of course also afterwards how TS-50701 can help. So explain a bit on the general concepts there, and in the end show how those concepts can be used to solve some compliance-based issues. So let's start with some cybersecurity challenges that we have in the railway domain. I think if you are from the cybersecurity domain or from some other domain, you might ask yourself the question, okay, we have the year 2021, almost 2022. So cybersecurity is at least known for a decade or more in the wider world. So why do we have to invent something for the railway specifically? There are, of course, some standards for industrial automation. There is a good one, the IEC 62443, which is developed in the United States. But we have in the railway some specific challenges that cannot easily be tackled, because 62443 is based mainly for plants, for facilities, and so on. At least this is the base audience. So you can say, okay, I want to secure a system. I put a fence around it. I put there maybe some guard dogs, maybe guards, whatever. But in the railway domain, you cannot easily protect perimeters, and you almost have to assume that all your systems run in sort of an adversary environment, because people have to enter trains, people have to cross railway crossings. Otherwise, you get a big mess with your government if you simply close down all the roads that pass tracks and so on, or you simply lose your business model because nobody is able to enter trains anymore. And then you have people entering and exiting your environment. And besides this, trains and railways are a bit of a diverse ecosystem. So it is not like you simply have your country and you have a railroad system there in most cases, but you are connected to maybe other companies, to other countries. Your trains travel from A to B and so on, maybe also from one country through another one to a third one, and things communicate. At least currently you have ETCS there. Later on there will be ATO, so autonomous driving, and communication is increasing. And maybe you at some point have a gigantic train-formed USB stick traveling across borders, which then can start infecting interlockings in the worst case. So this has to be prevented. And there is some other challenge that we have, because we have to be commercially viable. There are some discussions ongoing, for instance, in Europe, which mode of transport should be used. Of course, trains are seen as sustainable one, but quite often you see trucks driving thousands of kilometers with some goods, and you have to keep track with this, otherwise you will be somehow overwhelmed by road transport. And one also important thing is, in the railways, you do not only have one company that's responsible for everything, but you have several parties that have to communicate in order to bring a system to life and to keep it secure. Just a small example, think about your own company. You at least will have a sort of safety department, you will have a security department, and for setting a system into operation, these at least have to communicate. Maybe you have a system engineering unit, and of course, you have the same stuff at suppliers, at integrators, and so on. So quite a big bunch of people who should somehow be able to interact, and this in a sort of standardized way. So this is on the one hand from a cybersecurity perspective. On the other hand, we have some regulations that impact railways quite nice over the last couple of years. I think most commonly known, there are cybersecurity laws. I just listed a few of them. On European level, we have the NIS directive active there since 3 or 4 years, I think now. And of course, also the national implementations of this law. In the United States, there is just some weeks ago, I think, there was a TSA directive on cybersecurity issued. All have the same high-level goal: ensure that the operators have a secure infrastructure running there, simply to also protect critical infrastructures, and by protecting those, protecting the passengers, the trains, the environment, whatever. So really keep it safe. There on another way, you have also emerging over the last couple of years some stuff like GDPR, privacy regulations. So you have to somehow protect the data of your passengers, of your employees, maybe also of your customers, because you are transporting goods. And the last one, maybe the oldest one in the railway domain, you have the regulations on safe rail operations issued by your national authorities. And these really check that, you operate in a safe environment, that you follow specific techniques, that there is not an easy way that the system malfunctions and afterwards your train crashes and you have big issues and impacts. And this has been evolving over the last couple of, not 100 years, but since 1900, there have been the first or some quite good works on safety. So this is quite advanced, but you have to keep this in your mind when doing cybersecurity. So you might now think, okay, some high-level things, maybe heard about one or other buzzword. So how does this really affect now rail transport? What is the impact? So really the concrete one. Just as a quick disclaimer, this is not a complete overview. I'm just going across the high-level points in a way that you get a rough insight, and also that we can show you how TS-50701 might be useful to help tackle those challenges. So on the last slide, I already mentioned there is some cybersecurity regulation. We have here, for instance, the NIS directive on this slide. And in order to ensure that you have a secure infrastructure, there are 4 main points to follow. The first one is maybe a bit fuzzy. If you read the standard, not the standard, but the regulation, it states you have to do sort of state-of-the-art cybersecurity, which can be a bit interesting, because you might think about, okay, what is state-of-the-art? Because as soon as I implement a system, maybe it's already outdated, because there have been some years and so on in between. So you have to find a way how you can at least mention we are a state-of-the-art. And typically this is done in the railway domain by sort of a standard. Then a second topic is, you cannot simply say I only do cybersecurity for my new developed systems, but you also have to consider your legacy ones. So the whole environment has to be covered, not just newly built stuff. Maybe not with the full beautifulness of solutions that you have, but at least you have to think about it and mitigate as much as possible. And now there are 2 other points which are sort of a basic requirement from NIST directive and the implementations on local level. First, you have to know your assets, because if you don't know your stuff, how can you protect it? So you have to know what type of interlocking systems you have there, maybe what controllers you have on a train, and of course also what impact it can have if there is an issue. And then you have to estimate what is critical, and then also in some cases, I think it's mostly in Europe the same, you have to register it with your local authorities. Then why are you doing this? Because in case there is some issue happening, there should be investigations on those systems, and maybe also an information sharing between customers that use the same solution. This is at least the high level idea behind this. But in order to produce this information, you need some clear detection possibilities for an attack, and of course also the possibility to investigate. And on European level, for instance, it's mentioned that you have to produce a qualified report on what happened there. And qualified means it's not just, okay, my interlocking system got stuck and some weird stuff happened, but really in process X, this and that was discovered. Maybe this was by an attacker, this path was taken, and so on. So really into the details. So these are the main points from the cybersecurity point of view. So as mentioned, it's not complete, but the most important ones, I think. Now, there is something else to consider, and this is also the regulatory impacts on your safe rail operations, because you have their laws, you have regulations. For instance, some railway laws are in place which state you have to do something. And what does this mean for cybersecurity? You have to ensure that you do not interfere with the safety certification. So every system in the critical railway, so the mission critical systems of railways, are usually certified after an homologation process with the National Railway Authority, and then you get sort of a stamp or a certificate or whatever. So you have to check that your solution does not, or what you do does not impact this safety certificate, because otherwise you have to reapply for it, and maybe you also have to do some independent assessments and stuff like this, and this can take time. So security solutions should be in a way that they do not have an effect on safety, otherwise we have a big mess. So we have to find ways how to deal with this. So I promised already at the beginning, I don't want to raise only challenges and maybe tell you how bad the world is, but also tell you what we have in place since a couple of months now in order to assist in those topics. So we have now TS-50701. This thing came into life July 2021 and is now already available in some of the stores where you can get standards and so on. And the TS is a quite good framework, I think, for really protecting rail transport. It is not completely reinventing the wheel, but it uses concepts of the things we already know. First thing to mention is we have the 62443 series, which is dealing with security for industrial control systems. So the general concepts from there are taken, also the requirements from there are taken, which is quite important because one of the main goals of the working group behind TS-50701 was that railways do not require complete own certificates, but that railway systems can also make use of cybersecurity solutions developed for maybe the chemical industry, maybe for aviation and so on. So if you develop the solution or develop a solution to 62443, then this is most likely also applicable for railway systems. Of course, it has to fit the security level targets, but this is another topic. So the concepts are the same. What then is taken into account is railway companies usually have some system engineering principles and processes in place, mainly focused on safety. For instance, in Europe, quite common is EN 50126, which is about system engineering for railway systems, which provides you with life cycles and so on. And the idea was not to reinvent some completely independent security lifecycle and domain, but use what we have and adapt this either to railways or to security, which then led to some specific architecture models, so that the security guy gets to know the railway domain, that the railway guy understands what security is about, and also some design principles and methods adjusted to the railway needs. This is what the standard delivers you. One additional remark, over the last month there were some discussions because the TS is mainly written for railways, so main lines and stuff like this, but it can also be adapted to other forms of rail transport. Not one-to-one, but most of the concepts are usable. I think also the requirements will be applicable, and there is currently already some work being done for an adaptation for metros, I think, by UITP, expected beginning of next year. So also based on this document. So concepts are applicable, maybe some small changes have to be done. But this is just a rough overview. So how does this look like? What you can expect there, as I mentioned, we focus on the already existing things. So with system engineering, you usually have a workflow like you make a concept of your system. Afterwards, you have the second phase of design, which is then about system definition and the operational context. And there the TS starts with really introducing security activities into this lifecycle model. You have on the left side, so there is a long table with activities for each phase of system engineering. And then you have synchronization points, also things that are handed over from one stakeholder to the other one. And of course, also the cybersecurity activities that should be at least performed in this stage. You can see one example for phase 2 system definition on the screen. There are some clear cybersecurity activities. For instance, you have an initial logical architecture. Then, of course, the security team should think about, does this make sense how things communicate? Maybe should we change some stuff? Should we split up or combine systems for better security? And then they hand over maybe a list with recommendations to system engineering afterwards. What is handed over at least can be seen in the middle of the screen. You have some synchronization points and deliverables to be handed over. Arrows from left to right are from system engineering to security engineering, from right to the left, security engineering hands something back to system engineering. Why has this been done? Because my background is in interlocking security architectures, and when we started with this topic 5 years ago, it was a bit of a mess because I was working for an operator and it was like, okay, guys, we have now our concept, what we would like to do. We went to the supplier and told him, yeah, so please now provide us this information. And he mentioned, no, I do not have this information. Do this on your own. It was like, okay, how should I as an operator have this information? Which is a bit a hen-egg problem. So this is really to solve this up, and these synchronization points, these were aligned between operators, integrators, and also suppliers. So should be quite good to follow. One additional point, as I mentioned, this interaction between safety and security, there is an important concept introduced with the TS, namely the cybersecurity case. You can really get a big mess if you, for your safety certification, include very concrete cybersecurity requirements in your safety case, because then, as soon as you change something to this to the way how you fulfill this requirement, you might have to change maybe your safety case because this changes, and then you have the whole chain again with independent assessors, certification, maybe testing, and so on. So the idea was with the TS to break this up and really have a separate cybersecurity case. So you, in the safety one, you only mention, okay, I want to have some high level requirement on cybersecurity. Could be, for instance, something like integrity of communication has to be ensured, very high level. How this is done is then a point for the cybersecurity case, where you define, okay, for integrity, I have those threats to think about, and then you show in the cybersecurity case how you fulfill those points and so on, and afterwards you provide evidence to safety. How you fulfilled this, maybe also residual risks and stuff like this. Then, if you have to do patching or stuff like this, you go for the cybersecurity case, check what changed, what interfaces you have with safety, if they all remain the same. Of course, you do some tests, but you only have to change the cybersecurity case while the safety case, at least this is the idea, remains untouched. So you decouple safety and security in this way. So a nice concept that you can see in this document, which then will help with cybersecurity in at least new developed products. Now, we had at the beginning some requirements for operators and how the TS can help with those. So what I think became quite obvious, synchronization points are given, and state-of-the-art security, as we have now a standard or framework that can be applied for security, we can also do state-of-the-art security. So this is given. For legacy systems, you might now think, okay, nice, I have now everything I want to use or can use for new developments. But for legacy systems, there's a specific annex in the document which tells you what could be done for already existing systems to bring them to a better state of security. These were all agreed between also suppliers and operators, and this makes sense, at least from the expert group that we had. And you now have also means how to handle safety and security. If everything works as this, has to be evaluated, but we are quite optimistic, and we also had some of the railway authorities in our working group, so this should be something that's applicable, that can work and should work. There are also two other things that I mentioned before, coming from the cybersecurity regulations. So you have to know your critical assets. Of course, you also have to detect attacks and being able to do some forensics and investigation on this. There, the TS gives you some requirements and basic principles how you should do this, but of course, the TS cannot solve asset inventory and identification completely. This has to be simply done by the operator or in cooperation between operator and supplier, or by some tooling that you can have afterwards in order to get things automated. Now, to sum this up, the technical specification was published in July 2021. You can get it from separate shops if you would like to. And with this, we now have a first specific cybersecurity framework for rail transportation. If you follow this document, it will really help you to become compliant to cybersecurity regulation, and of course, not only bringing or fulfilling regulatory requirements, but also, of course, getting a secure system, because I think this is the main goal, even if you do not have regulatory requirements. But something really to mention, sort of as a disclaimer, TS-50701 provides you with, let's say, the framework to get secure and the methodologies and concepts and so on, but you have to really fill this with life. You can see on the lower end, people, process, technology. So for all those areas, you will find some requirements in the document and what should be done. But of course, you will have to implement things, bring tools into life, bring processes into operation, educate people. Really bring things up and running. And this concludes my talk for the moment. So thanks for your attention. And then, Miki, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christian. It was fascinating, and thank you for introducing us to the standard. So in the second part of this webinar, I will go over and explain how Silas One can help companies in tackling those challenges that Christian just mentioned with the TS-50701. So just a quick background for those of you who are not familiar with Silas. Silas, we are a product company focus on railway cybersecurity. We have a portfolio of products that are built to be deployed on the railway environment under all of the constraints that railway environment mean. Our products are divided to onboard protection products, Silas One for onboard protection, and as well as Silas One for signaling and infrastructure protection. And our solutions are multi-level cyber protection solutions that cover all the key technologies in the railway domain. So those are CBTC, interlocking, ZRTMS, positive train control, rolling stock in different ways, and it's all powered by ML and patented technology. The way you deploy Silas One is very simple. It's a non-intrusive solution. You deploy it basically by placing components that we call Silas One probes. You place them to monitor your systems. Those can be connected via a tap or a span port, and they are really simple to deploy in a sense, and they are built also for very scalable environments like we know that we have on railways. You deploy those probes around your infrastructure and on your trains. They all collect information and analyze and pre-process it, and then send information to the Silas One platform, which in turn presents all the cybersecurity insights gathered from the network in a centralized place in a way that your security teams or operations teams can consume this information. The Silas One platform can integrate with various other security components. We know security is a team game, and you have different types of security solutions. Silas One is a platform that is built to be integrated with your SIM systems, with your next generation firewalls, etc. And it's all built in a workflow that can be adapted and used by railway companies in a sense that it won't impact their operations and also will provide them much more benefits when operating the trains. The Silas One solutions are constantly updated by the latest research coming from the Silas labs. Silas has research teams that dedicated around the clock to secure railways and finding the latest threats that we see. And those threats are mitigated by the Silas One platform, and it keeps you one step ahead of anyone who might attack you. The way we see Silas One is that Silas One is an enabler for TS-50701. As Christian mentioned, TS-50701 is a great standard that comes to brings us more requirements and best practices on how should you secure your systems. But in a sense, in reality, you see that in order to get to the scalable nature of railways, the scalable nature of thousands of kilometers of networks and hundreds of rolling stock in your fleet, you need to have something automated that analyzes and processes the information for your security purposes. And Silas One is built exactly in that sense. It's an automated and scalable security solution that acts as a multi-purpose control for the TS requirements. As Christian mentioned, safety comes first in the railway domain, and Silas One is non-intrusive. It doesn't have an impact on your safety. It stands in a way that it can provide you all those security benefits without compromising any of your safety. And apart from that, it's also a multifunction compensating control. So especially when you deal with install base, but also in future systems, you will find out that not every state-of-the-art solution can be implemented in the rail domain. The reason for that is usually safety, it's interference with operations, and so on. And Silas One can actually help and protect you even in situations that are hard to protect because of its non-intrusive nature. It's simple to deploy. So unlike other systems, our system is simple to deploy within hours, and actually within the first few minutes of deployment, you already start seeing value, and with hours, you can cover large portions of your network. And that way you can easily test it, you can easily verify its operation and see it working and protecting you in real time. Next, we will cover some of the benefits that Silas One brings that are aligned as well with the standards. Let's start first with asset management. Asset management is a huge challenge in the railway domain. You have assets spread all around the fields, communicating via different protocols, different carrier lines. And as part of the TS-50701, one of the important requirements is to automatically or mostly identify all of the assets in the system under consideration. So while identify can mean also you can write them all in a spreadsheet, but then you understand this approach is not scalable. It won't work when the system will change. It will be very hard to maintain, and you will find that you spend a lot of money in getting people to all of those different places. With Silas One, you can easily deploy the solution on your network, and Silas One will gather all the information about the assets, will put it in a centralized place. It will also group your assets by their rail operational function, and that's important because Silas One is built from scratch to protect railways. It also has the right ontology, and when this asset is discovered in Silas One, it's discovered together with all of the right properties, and not just with their IP address, for example, of the bank, but rather with more interesting properties, like, for example, its functional part in the railway domain, its safety level, as well as whether it's a crown jewel or not, and also its location. Location is super important. We are talking here about systems that have very widespread. They are very widespread all across countries or cities, and you want to understand what is currently impacted by an event, and that Silas One can bring you. It has a live monitoring of your inventory, and you can get very easily the answer to the question, what do I have in my network, and whether it was changed. It could have been changed, for example, by a maintenance operation, but you will get this information immediately in Silas One. Next, we will talk about the continuous security monitoring. And the standard actually mentions this part quite a lot. When you have an existing system, it's very hard to protect it because changes are very costly. And as well as also in new systems that you deploy, you want to understand what's going on in real time. For example, you can have vulnerabilities such as the latest Log4j, and it can impact your network. And those vulnerabilities are every week generated, and as railway systems are really large, they have various types of assets, and those assets are becoming vulnerable from time to time. And because of that, you need to have something that continuously monitors your networks and lets you know whether you're currently vulnerable to anything new, whether an attack is going on. So you need to have an ability to answer the question whether I'm currently under attack. Even if I'm protected, I need to know if someone is trying to attack me, and that's something that Silas One brings you out of the box. It does it all with deep packet inspection, so it actually covers your proprietary protocols, and we know that more than 80% of the protocols in a typical railway network are proprietary, used only by the railway domain. And because of that, you need to have solutions that understand the context, otherwise they will be quite useless. And the way to make them useful is by actually having the right logic in them, the logic that understands what the systems are meant to do, as well as what is the language that is used between the components. Silas One is built based on zero trust principles. It doesn't assume anything about the existing network, and it can detect any unauthorized access. It's continuously updated with rail-centric threat intelligence. As I mentioned, it's part of the research that we do and the analysis that we have in the team, and it provides you with a network-based intrusion detection. Next, we will talk about railway security operations and forensics. That's a really big topic because we understand that when you look at railway cybersecurity, it's a combined effort between the railway and security people. And when you try to investigate and respond to events, you need to have the right functions implemented. So the standard also requires you to have a centralized and continuous data collection for forensic investigations. You can think about it as some sort of a black box or recording unit that will have all the information from the various components that will help you to troubleshoot and to investigate cyber events, and Silas One can actually help you with that. Apart from that, it will give you an increased control over operational and security maintenance, so you will understand what's happening in your security operations, as well as what operational activities are taking part and whether they are impacting your security. It sometimes can happen because sometimes something you do in your operations or the maintenance might be flagged as a cyber event, and you will need to have this information in a centralized platform. It seamlessly integrates between your operations control center to your security operations center, and it strengthens your security posture by that, because there is a key question of what do you do when you have an event in your operational system, and you need to have the right response to this question. You need to make sure that you have the right response and you know what is the actual impact of every event, and you practically have something to do with it, because just knowing if an event is happening is just not enough. Knowing about incidents or vulnerabilities without having the way to respond to them, that will result in a very ineffective activity. you need to make sure that when you have an event, you know how to respond to that. And that's exactly what Silas One does because of its multidisciplinary approach that combines railway and cybersecurity. We bring up the right playbooks and the right activities that will help you to maintain your security posture and also your operations running when a cyber incident is happening. And it will make sure to inform you what is the coverage of the current event, as well what should be your ideal response to that. And as I mentioned, it also helps you in reporting and auditing security incidents. It's key requirement in this standard, but also in others. You need to have also an ability to report to management, report to authorities, and that's something that you can get out of the box with the platform. The last benefit I will discuss for today will be the ability of Silas One to partition your railway system into security zones and conduits. So we talked before about your need in identifying all of your assets, but what do you do with it? What you usually need to do is to set targets and security levels to each of your security zones. So what are those security zones? The standards define how to divide them into. But in Silas, we also developed our own algorithms that help the railway network and partitioning your network into security zones and conduits. The solution is completely unintrusive, so you can also apply those partitioning in existing system. You don't need to do it also, and you don't have to do it only on your systems, but the ability of our solution is actually dividing into the security zone that you would like to maintain. It's dividing and ensuring that only allowed traffic will pass between the zones, and it will be managed in the right way according to the criticality level of each security zone and conduit. As I mentioned, it will all go continuously. Every type of violation, every type of miscommunications between the zones and conduits will be immediately flagged, and you will get the right mitigation instructions to ensure it's not going to happen again. And so you can isolate the block, or isolate the event as well. So as a key takeaway from my slides, we see that the TS-50701 is actually the first technical standard that tackles those complex challenges of syncing between the rail lifecycle to cybersecurity. We've seen it in all of our customer environments. It's always a challenge, but you also need to have the right resources to deal with it, and TS-50701 is a great resource for that. And I'm sure it's also going to evolve over the years and will answer more and more questions. Apart from having the standards, you also need to have solutions. And the reason for that is that the scale of a rail network is like nothing you see in other places. You have networks that are crossing the country. You have systems that sometimes in isolated locations. You have so many assets with so many types. And the only scalable way of actually protecting, monitoring, and ensuring that they are secure is by having automated solutions. And with Silas One, which was built exactly for those needs, which was built exactly for those constraints of safety, of scale, etc., we enable operators to protect both their existing and new systems. So this one is important. Many times when standards come out, it's very hard to imagine how would you protect your existing systems and what would you do with it. You usually apply them in future tenders, etc. But reality is that most of your assets are the ones that are currently deployed. And part of your challenges will be how do you secure those existing assets, which are more like hot potatoes in nowadays environment. And with Silas One, you can actually get the right level of security also for existing assets in a way that wouldn't change them significantly, and actually wouldn't change them at all, but it will dramatically increase your security posture, will make sure that you are covered against the recent threats. Thank you very much. And now we're going to open the floor to questions from our audience. Christian, maybe you'll get back for the questions. Great. So, what questions do we have? Not sure if I'm seeing them. example. Again, with the technical issues, we will just read the questions and we'll few seconds, please, and we will just go ahead with the questions. Cool. So the first question is just getting in front another channel. So are there plans to provide real-time threat detection when there is no communication with the ground? I understood it's basically forensic support and partial real-time as long as there is ground connectivity. The question is with regards to concerns with hypothetical train hijacking from within the train in areas with poor connectivity. So that's a great question. So how do you actually protect systems with operational constraints? There are a few questions to ask yourself here. First is, how do you respond to such events? And that's more of a philosophical question, but it's important. And the way our solution Silas One works is that it's connected to your train networks, and it's capable of alerting on any threats going on your trains. There are a few points to consider here. First is a train incident is something that takes a while. According to the cyber kill chain, it's all very famous. And the cyber kill chain is such that an attacker goes through different stages in its life cycle, and our goal is to detect them in its earlier stages and detect all the threat vectors that they're using once they also do reconnaissance activities. The other thing to consider is how do you build your operational team around it. So for instance, how would you ensure that your security team will be able to communicate with your operations team, and who will be your first or second line of defense? In some environments, it's going to be more challenging, but having the train driver is something that we actually tried to have as an operational line of defense, but found out that it's quite challenging. So my recommendation in a similar situation is actually track the initial footprints of an attack and make sure that you are covered against them, as well as making sure that your ability to respond to events is nearly real time. Great, now the solution works again. Okay, so next question is how Silas One different from other network intrusion detection systems, and it mentions some companies, Forescout, Nozomi Networks, etc. So without going into the details of other solutions, I will explain how Silas One is built and how is it helpful in those environments. So the main thing is that Silas One has been built in a way that it takes into account the railway environment. And by railway environment, we mean we know how to discover the right asset management and inventory, and what is an interlocking, what is an ATP system, what vital systems and what are not. Systems that were not built for rail, it will be very hard for them to identify those properties automatically. As also I mentioned, 80% or more of the traffic in the rail environment is proprietary. It's just built only and used solely in the railway business. And for that, in order to get the right level of coverage and identification, you'll probably need to have this railway logic in it. While concepts of operation are also different, because you also need to make sure that you have the right context from the operational perspective to respond to events. And by that, Silas One can help you because it bridges the gap between the security and operations people. Another question is how much of the solution is technology and how much process. So it's actually a combination. The technology is actually the more unique part that we bring up, but the process is actually also complementary because you cannot implement the right technology without having the right processes in place. And giving a technical solution is good, and we take pride in that, but we also take pride in our ability to integrate it inside the complex life cycles that Christian mentions in railways organization. And the idea there is that we are bringing the right technology that will take part of whatever technology can do in such environments, At the same time, we also bring our customers with the right support to implement the solutions and the right professional services around them. Because we know their challenges, we know how hard it is to communicate between railway and cybersecurity teams. And that's exactly what we also bring to the table. Any additional questions?
So I have one question from the chat. So it is about if I foresee the need in the future for the definition of safety standards to change in order to accommodate to the ever-changing cybersecurity environment. And also the suggestion perhaps moving towards functional safety. To be honest, my personal point of view on this is that safety and security should be decoupled in this way. So if you have a safety standard, this thing should really consider safety of the system and mention that there is something that takes security into account. And this would then, for instance, be some document like the TS-50701, or maybe if this is not applicable or you can't apply it, use IEC 62443. But really have something for security and something for safety. What has to be defined in the future safety standards, or maybe not the safety standards, but this is more a topic for the authorities, the railway authorities, is that they have to consider that the systems cannot be static as before, meaning that it has to be thought about how maybe certification processes can be faster and stuff like this. This is in Europe at least already present at the European Railway Agency. So there are discussions happening, but this will also take some time. So one document for security, one for safety, but there needs to be a clear interface. There was another question again on standards, which is about, is the standard mandatory for railway companies to adopt? No, it is not mandatory. It is currently a technical specification under SENELEC, which means the technical specification is sort of a recommendation that you can use as best practice, as state of the art, but you have no real, it's not mandatory. What might happen over the next years in Europe is that there will be a recommendation to use it for railways, and maybe at a later point when it is then not a technical specification anymore, but also maybe an European standard or an IEC standard, so one level above, that there might be an obligation to use it. And then there is another one also, I'm not sure, yeah, this is for me, I think. The question is, does it mean, so if I understand the question right, it is if things like a signal lamp or a point machine as part of the electronic interlocking infrastructure are also considered. The technical specification takes into account everything which has sort of logic in it. If you just have some wiring or analog signals and whatever, this is out of scope, so pure electronics. If you have sort of an object controller at a signal, this is in scope. This depends on what type of interlocking architecture you have. If it's quite new, then you might have controllers there with logic, would be in scope. If it's just some power line that goes there, out of scope. But then there is some element that controls this power line, and this would be in scope.
Great. I have another question here about how do you square non-intrusive system with virtual zoning, which presumably must restrict traffic. So the reality is that you cannot be very ideal at the moment in many of those security zone principles, especially when tackling existing systems, but also in future systems. For instance, let's say you have some sort of a proprietary protocol which is used for train control. You need to have an ability to control what are the messages that are passing. We've seen tons of protocols. In many of the protocols, what you find out is that you have one main message that can carry different types of payloads, and those payloads are just passing through firewalls all across your network. And the reason for that is the firewalls, they don't get to the level of sophistication to even understand what it means. So while maybe you're assuming that you have some sort of segmentation devices in your network, in reality, we saw in tons of the environments is that the policies are so permissive that they don't even take into account the fact that you have an event. The boxes are there just for nothing. And what we found out is the only practical way of actually acting with it is having those parts, those gateways, having some sort of deep packet inspection. And there are multiple ways of doing it. And the deep packet inspection is something that we do within our solution, and we can actually help with segmentation by adjusting those firewall policies on the fly as things are moving, as well as when you have a cybersecurity incident, you can isolate a specific asset. And when an asset is miscommunicating between your security zones, that way you are able to alert to that. In all general, the main idea here is to reduce your cybersecurity risk and get to a risk level that is accepted. And the way of doing it is by actually putting the controls that you can put in place in those environments. And we found out to be very practical in helping to detect those issues in real time. Great.
I could pick up one question that was asked, and this is about who would typically be responsible for a solution as presented by Mickey as at an operator. From the experience I have with operations, I would assume if it's on the infrastructure, it would be more or less sort of a security operations center involved there. They would, let's say, they are operating, also monitoring for other devices and so on. Maybe they have also their hands on some encryption boxes, whatever. So they do this stuff already. So this tool would provide them additional insight in the operational environments. So these really operational and critical railway networks. And in case they would see some strange behavior, most likely there would be a team set in place, not only of the persons, of the security guys from the Security Operations Center, but also with some persons involved from operations, so rail operations, that can estimate what this means. For instance, for a cybersecurity guy, if you hear, okay, this object controller at the signal, let's call it 12N, is now mining Bitcoins, might be sort of, aha, okay, interesting. But what does it mean? Is signal 12N important? Is it unimportant? So this is something only operations can estimate, and they will have to tell you, okay, shut it down or maybe do something else. So that there needs to be sort of a team between security and railway operations.
That's right. Another question I have here in my chat is the monitoring system a piece of add-on hardware or can be integrated into an existing device with sufficient spare space, gateway, or TCMS processor? So that's a great question. Silas One solution is only software-based. We use hardware off the shelf when it's needed, and we're capable of deploying our solutions in various modes. It includes a container, just a Linux executable, or any other mode of virtual machine, etc. We can also provide the probes themselves with hardware. We know that the rolling stock environments, they have some challenges in terms of spare space. So many times the solution is actually deployed as a software only. And yeah, it can be deployed on a gateway, it can be deployed on an external box or an hypervisor, as I mentioned. All right, so I was asked if we will share the slides. So the answer is we will send later on the recording of the webinar as well. Another question I have here is role-based access control is applicable to your proposed solution? If yes, what techniques do we have for role-based access control? So that's a question of multiple facets. So it's whether Silas One itself supports role-based access control, then the answer is yes. In the level of the railway environment, there is a big challenge of role-based access control because many times we see that the environments sometimes have default passwords and it actually makes all the environment quite flat, because in specific operating station, you may have a challenge that there is no Active Directory or similar service, and anyone can just use the station with the same password. We have all those videos on YouTube that you can probably see the password in some sticker around. And actually, what Silas One helps you when you're doing the real-time monitoring is it can differentiate the different functional assets in your system and see whether they're miscommunicating, and whether, for example, asset from one zone is communicating with an asset from another zone, and so on, whether malicious commands are being sent in an interface that they're not supposed to be sent in. So all of it can be covered by Silas One. It actually also helps you with the insider issues that you might have, and the fact that if someone is inside your network, it can move in a flat way. And Silas One helps because it can mitigate the risk, and it monitors all the traffic inside your networks. When Silas going to release a technical training to the whole industry to profit from your specific real cybersecurity knowledge? So that's a great question. We will announce that. But yeah, we have lots of concepts that we've developed over the years, and those concepts will be also shared, of course, with the industry. How could your solution help in ongoing project that needs to reach security level 3? And not sure in this particular situation, some suppliers don't have any clear cybersecurity requirements. So in general, when we look at standards as the TS-50701 on IEC 62443-3, there is a large challenge that they rely on having the components of the systems developed according to IEC 62443-4-1 or -4-2, but in reality, most of the solutions are not that way. In that sense, you many times need to implement compensating control, and that gets back to what I mentioned before on the ability of the solution. We actually implemented it before in different projects around the world, and actually also got certifications for independent safety assessors, so we will be in touch related to that. Do you have some questions in your sub-question? Let's give a last one. And
no, I don't have any left.
Okay, cool. So I have a question that might be relevant for you. Let's do a last one. And by the way, if we haven't addressed one of the questions, we will address them over email. So please feel free to reach out both to me or to Christian, and we will share as a follow-up our details. The question is, how in an early project stage of development do we need to determine the security level are planning to achieve? So the question is basically for you, Christian, if you need to determine an early stage of product development the security level that you are going to achieve, and if it should be mapped with the security case report.
Yes, so there it is now. Yes, you have to do this at an early project stage. So in general, you will start with phase 1, a concept phase where you just describe your system. This is mostly done by system engineering. Phase 2 would then be sort of a logical design and also building the first zones and conduits. So then you know how your system looks like and how it is broken into parts. And then you do a sort of risk assessment and check there with a catalog of potential attacks that you see and requirements that you have from 62443, how high your security level target should be. This can be from the TS-50701 quite easy. If you have already a reference system, then you can simply check if this thing has the same situation and then simply use the security level, maybe SL2 or 3. Or you can really start from this whole vector, which has 7 elements, and increment from level 1 to level 2 and so on, and check if your threats that you see for your system are mitigated. This is the way how you should do it. If you are, let's say, if you think you have a very good feeling for security levels, you could of course also say, I want to have security level 3 full stop. But this is something which can either end up with an unfitted solution or you have an issue afterwards because it's quite costly. So you should go this path. once, and this will save you money, let's say, in the end, even though it requires some time at the beginning.
Great. So thank you, Christian, for the answers, and thank you very much, the audience, really engaging discussion. And thank you again, Christian, for being a great co-presenter and sharing your knowledge about the TS-50701. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but as I mentioned, we will reach out to all of the people who ask questions to make sure that those are being addressed. And we look forward in seeing you in our future events and webinars. And happy holidays and happy new year. And see you soon. Thank you very much.